Hi, welcome to the training webinar for this week. And this week we are going to talk about accessibility and responsiveness. Now, when I scheduled this webinar, we were laboring under a deadline from the Department of Justice that required all public agencies with more than 50,000 customers/users, they had to have level 2, well, it's actually called level AA web accessibility standards implemented to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title II. Since then, in fact, 2 days or 3 days before the April 24th deadline for the DOJ to begin enforcing Title II of the ADA, the Justice Department came out and said, everybody's got another year, so you don't have to worry about it until April 27th, 2027. So I'm sure a lot of people breathed a big sigh of relief for that. Now, in the run-up to what the original deadline was going to be, which was last week, we have been working on a lot of accessibility stuff in Process Director. Much of the accessibility compliance is actually built into Process Director forms right from the get-go. So there are a lot of things that Process Director is just going to do for you automatically. However, as a designer, there are still a number of accessibility practices that you need to implement as part of your form design. That's what we'll talk about today. So this is odd. Not sure why my web browser is so small and why it's not responding to 1918 by 1248. Okay. Or it could just be that I'm sharing too large a portion of my screen. I don't know, but anyway, let's get that fixed so that we can continue. So here is the accessibility form. I built this several years ago, but it's still a good example of the accessibility things that you need to implement in your applications. The first thing I want to talk about is color contrast. Irrespective of what your logo colors or your organization's brand colors are, you still have to implement the appropriate color contrast between foreground text and background text. So, for example, at BP Logix, that steel blue color that we use, which has a hexadecimal color of 528 BBC, that is the color that I used here. Now, I think this is a great color. I find it relatively readable, but it has a problem. It does not have the appropriate color contrast ratio. The World Wide Web Consortium's working group on accessibility standards, the WCAG, have a requirement that your color contrast between foreground and background colors is 4.5 to 1. Now, there's a great little tool for this. In fact, there are several tools that we'll look at, but the primary one and the one that I use all the time is the color contrast checker. It is at contrastchecker.com, and it is a great contrast checker. So let's take a look at a white, or this is foreground, 000. So let's change our foreground here to 528 BBC, which is the color that we use here at BP Logix. If we look at the little circles at the bottom, we can see several of them have turned red. That's because they do not meet the color contrast requirement of 4.5 to 1. So this color, this steel blue that we use here at BP Logix, is not level AA compliant. It's certainly not level AAA compliant, which is the higher level of compliance. Now, the law demands double A compliance, so we have to meet that. But wait, there is an exception. If this text in this color, 528 BBC is the hexadecimal color, if the text is larger than 18 points, it does pass double A level compliance. So I can use this color, but I can only use it when it is larger than 18 points, or rather when it is 18 points or larger. So I find this color contrast checker quite useful, because what it enables me to do is, let's say that I click on here and I go to my colors. And notice that there are some little boxes. They're both red and green right now. These boxes correspond with the circles that we see over here on the left. So I can take this color with this color picker, which I find really cool. Here's my current color, 528 BBC. So how do I make it double A compliant? Well, it obviously needs to be darker, because I need to increase the contrast ratio from the current, which is 3.63, and I've got to increase it to 4.5. So I can take this little slider here and I can push it up right to there, and that will give me a 4.94 contrast ratio between the foreground text and the background text. This is double A compliant. We saw this little circle turn green and this little square turned green over here. So this is good enough to use as a foreground color for text when displayed against a white background. So it's slightly darker than I would use for my logo, but it's close enough, and it does match the contrast ratio. Now, I'm not a big fan of using any colors other than black, or at the very least a very dark gray, for regular text. I think that's a best practice. So what we're largely talking about when we're talking about these sort of color contrasts is for header text, which, use of color is perfectly acceptable for header text, but you do need to match that level AA compliance with the WCAG standards. And those WCAG standards are, well, we can actually look them up on the web. We can just look up WCAG. It's WCAG. And let's actually go to w3c.org. W3C is the World Wide Web Consortium, which is where W3C comes from. This is more or less the standards body that determines what the web standards are. What is HTML? What are the specifications for various things? And one of the specifications they came up with is the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So this is what Title II of the ADA requires. Oh, by the way, if you're here from Canada, you also have the Accessibility Canada Act. Various provinces have, in some cases, I think Ontario has a very strict provincial accessibility act, in addition to the federal act coming out of Ottawa. So I'm going to talk in American terms. So I'm going to talk about the ADA and Title II of the ADA, because that's the majority of our customers. But we do recognize that both the ADA and is it Accessibility Canada or Accessible Canada Act? I can't remember the name of the exact act, but that and the provincial guidelines in Ontario, British Columbia, and I think Saskatchewan as well, they all refer to basically this. WCAG And there are evolving standards. So the original standard that everybody was looking at was WCAG 2.0. We're now up to WCAG 2.2. And those are minor changes to the standards, but the standards are the standards, and they are listed here. So this is where you need to go for knowing what the standards are, the full and formal standards. Now, in the documentation for Process Director, so we'll just go to doc.bplogix.com. If you go into the implementation guide and you go into implementation guidelines and you go to accessibility, there are 4 pages of accessibility. I should tell you, by the way, that I am actually revising this section of the documentation to add some more detailed information about certain topics. So this is going to change over the next week or so as I update this section of the documentation. It's fairly comprehensive now, but we have a training course on accessibility and responsiveness, and I have some information in that training course that I want to transfer over into the documentation. So this documentation is going to be a little more comprehensive over the next week or so. However, it does have all of the accessibility principles that we follow. It also gives you a list of tools that you might find very useful for checking accessibility on your end user forms. And by the way, I should point out that what we are talking about when we talk about accessibility are forms that are accessible by end users. We're not talking about the administrative UI. For a variety of reasons, it's almost technically impossible to make the administrative UI fully accessible, and that's not really a requirement of the ADA. The requirement for ADA is that end users need to be able to have an accessible interface. And that's what we have done for Process Director to make the interface accessible. Indeed, over the last 6 or 7 months, as that looming deadline was approaching, we've had many of our customers, especially higher ed customers and municipal customers, point out to us some deltas between what controls should be doing under certain configurations for accessibility and what they were actually doing. So occasionally missing a required accessibility tag, little things like that. That all happens in the background, and we have done many updates to the product to find any of these accessibility holes and close them. And we were doing that. In fact, we had a release scheduled for 24 April that had all the most recent accessibility fixes. Wouldn't surprise me if there's still a couple in there that people have not found yet because they're so, like who uses the slider control on a form or the rating control? Probably very few. It's conceivable that in some of those little used controls, there might be some accessibility issues that crop up. But in general, we handle accessibility in the product at the HTML level for the required tags and for ARIA tags and things like that. But for you to do checking on your own, there are several tools that you can use. Most of them are available for free, where you can just grab them from the Chrome store, and you can just install them in your browser and use them. I think a lot of people use the Wave accessibility extension. That may in fact be the most popular one out there. So that's there. The accessibility principles, there are 4 major WCAG accessibility principles. The documentation is split up so that we take a look at each of these principles, and it gives you what the guideline is right out of the WCAG standard, what the requirement for is to meet them, and then what Process Director Control does, or what you will have to do as a designer to meet those accessibility standards whenever you are designing your form. It does go fairly deep and fairly into detail to give you all of the standards. Now, not all of the web standards apply to Process Director. For example, there are some video components to web accessibility that, well, we don't worry too much about because we don't have a video control in Process Director. So some of the stuff in the standards are skipped, but I did try to go through and grab all of the principles that are relevant to Process Director and to designing forms for end users in Process Director. So you can peruse this documentation at your leisure, and in the fullness of time, it will also be expanded a little bit. It's not going to be a huge expansion, but there will be some. So what I did for this page, getting back to where we started, which is our color contrast, is I still used my 528 BBC steel blue for this header here because it's 18 points or larger, so that's fine. But any text that's smaller than that, I can't use it. And actually what I did for this header up here is I actually created this with a 4.5:1 contrast ratio so that color is definitely accessible. And you can see when you put them side by side that the top one is significantly darker. It's the top one that actually meets the 4.5:1 contrast ratio. By the way, another tool for those contrast ratios is this one. It's the Accessible Color Palettes tool. And you can actually just create your own color palettes. You can filter them by accessibility level so that you can just see what color matches. And you can play around with these colors up here to remove colors. It's kind of cool, I guess. And there is also a palette generator where you can just go in and once again, I'll use our 528 BBC color. And when I put a color in here, I can generate a color palette that is complementary to this color. So this is going to be my primary color, let's say. And then when I generate, it will generate a color palette that is contrasting and will give me the contrast ratios for each one. So black text on this green is technically 5.72:1. I don't think I like that. I think I would prefer to have that text white. I think that would be more readable, but I might be wrong. But you can see these various palettes and you can load more palettes. So if you're playing around with color, if you have that freedom, that's available to you as well. Oh, and by the way, for more information about accessibility, there's WebAIM. It's a website that is really all about accessibility and accessibility training. So it's something that you might find worthwhile to check out. And now I appear to have gotten rid of my accessibility form. So I want to throw that right back up here. Okay, now these color contrasts don't apply to certain items. For example, a logo. So here is the old Process Director 5.0 logo. Note, by the way, as my mouse points over it, a little tooltip has popped up. We'll talk about that in a second. Now, this text here in this color, where it says Process Director, that is not compliant in terms of color contrast. It doesn't have to be. It's a logo. Logos are exempt from the color contrast requirements. We have to know that they're a logo, but they are exempt. Now, this image that I've put on here, there's another requirement. Never use text for images. It's okay for logos. But other than that, if you have text, text needs to be text. Using images for text, which used to be really common where people wanted to have some fancy font in some text, and they knew that Nobody would have it on their computer. They would just create an image with the desired text and they'd drop that image on a page and voila, everything looks wonderful. Well, you can't do that anymore. If you can put it in text, it must be in text. Logos, again, are exempt from those sorts of requirements because the logos are considered largely decorative items. However, there are some things that no matter what image you use, it has to have, one of which is the alternative text. You must have alternative text. By the way, it's the alternative text that is popping open this little pop-up here whenever I pause my mouse over the image. We need to look at this actually in design view. So let's do that. Let's go to this image. Now, in Process Director, we have a couple of different image controls. There is the main image control. It is not a Process Director control. It is a control that is built into CK Editor, the HTML editor that we use to build forms. It's a pretty good image control. It has lots of great properties. Here's my alternative text, Process Director v5.0 logo. The reason why this alternative text is so important is because assistive devices for the visually impaired, they're not going to be very helpful with translating what images are, but we do need to tell the user what, if we use an image, what that image is. So in this case, I've put in an alternative text, Process Director v5.0 logo, and on an assistive device, the assistive device will actually read this audibly to the end user so that they know what that logo is. So the alternative text is very important. On the Advanced tab for this image, there are also two important properties, the long description URL and the Process Director, the advisory title. This advisory title, actually it's the advisory title and not the alt text that appears whenever I mouse over the image. These are not required, although the advisory title is a good idea. Alt text is required. For some images, especially for technical images, just presenting the image alone may not be good enough. So the long description URL enables you to place the URL of an HTML document that contains a complete description of the image, which you might find useful in either a scientific or other academic context. So those two properties are there for the normal image control. Now, there is the regular Process Director image control, which I'm just going to slap in here. So we go to, and I forget where it is. I thought it was in other controls. There it is, right there. Why couldn't I find it? The image control. This control is a bit different because this control is designed for use specifically in Process Director. It's not really a display control. It's a control that you would use if you wanted to generate a QR code or something like that. I mean, you can use it as a regular image control because it does have the alt tag, which is required. So you can throw in the alt tag. The other thing is if we go to this regular control right here, the regular image control, there's one thing it's missing, and that is the field properties control, because it is not a Process Director control. So here with the Process Director image control, while it doesn't have the long description URL or what have you, it still has the alt tag. That is required. And of course, it also has the field properties so that you can set the display image. And you can also set the tooltip. The tooltip is essentially the alternative description that we saw over here. The advisory title That advisory title is the equivalent of the tooltip for the image control. So they are similar controls. The image control is actually designed for use within Process Director. You can like set the image URL to a system variable. So if current user format equals signature, right? And it would show the signature image that the current user has uploaded. So it's a little more flexible control. The one here is just literally a normal image control. It is not a process director control. Let's see, are there... Okay, so I've got all of the stuff for that control. So image controls have some special sauce that they need. In fact, any control that you see that has an alt property, where's a control? Let's see, button. Text array name. Okay. Oh, there we go. Alt tag. It's right there. There's your alt tag property. So even buttons, if there is an alt tag property, need an alt tag property. Now, this is kind of a fallback from the days when you could have buttons that just displayed images. And indeed, there are buttons that still just display images. In fact, the default buttons in an array for the move up and move down, they just have the up arrows and the down arrows or the big X. Those images are basically the entire context of the button. In accessibility, it's generally a bad idea to have just a button tag. However, there's an exception. I mean, sorry, not a button tag, to have an image button, a button that is only an image and has no text on it. But there is an exception, and that is an exception for space. So, for example, when we're building an array, and I get out to the far right-hand side of the array, one of the reasons why those array controls, and let's see, let me just slap one on here real quick. So let's just go with move array row up. Okay, that's just a button or just an image button. And it is only an image. That is where the alt tag comes in. Because if I'm limited in space, like I usually am in an array, the amount of horizontal space I have is fairly strictly determined. And so therefore I need to save as much horizontal space as I can. So when I want to throw these three buttons on here, then I will generally toss them on as image buttons, and that is the default whenever you drop one of these buttons on here. You can change that. You can actually change the text of those buttons. So there is a text property, so you can actually add text to those buttons. But if you're going to use an image button, which again is allowable if space needs require it, then you do need to use the alt tag to specify some text that can be conveyed to the end user, even if the text doesn't appear on the button. Now, in general, it's a bad idea to have buttons that don't have text. Buttons, as a default, should have text. But these little icon buttons, they don't have them for space reasons. That's okay too, but you do need to minimize that. The general rule is buttons need to have text in addition to an image on the button. So if we go to the add row button here, obviously it has its own text, add row, and in an assistive device, it will read that text right off of the button. So you'll be fine for that. So that alt is very important. So whenever you see alt tag or alt text, you need to fill it out, because what that's telling you is this is this control might need to be read by an assistive device. It needs some sort of text representation of what it is that we're seeing. In most cases, we think about this in terms of images, but you do need to also think about it in terms of buttons as well. Now, there is one thing that we've done that you can safely ignore. And let's see, I got to find one that has it. Maybe I should go back to, I thought a normal control would have it. Let's try this one. I've got to find where it is. We may not have it for all of them. Date picker. Yeah, date picker does have it. Oh, the label has it. This property right here, access key. Technically, what it is supposed to do is give you a key or key combination that will automatically move to and give focus to this control. So for the due date label, it has an access key, and that access key, were I to press it, and it is most likely not just a key, but rather a key combination. When I press it, it would automatically just go to and select the due date control so that you could fill it out directly. Let's file access key under one of those. It sounded like a good idea when we came up with it. And then in the real world, everybody realized it was awful. You can safely ignore the access key property. And the reason why is that assistive devices either don't look at it at all, and those assistive devices that do look for the access key implement it inconsistently. There's no real standard for it. There's no way really to tell how it's supposed to work. Certainly in terms of the way that assistive devices have implemented it, when they have chosen to, is all over the place. So while the access key is technically an accessibility property, it's essentially useless, so you don't need to worry about it. I do have a link to the don't worry about that, that takes you to an explanation as to why not to worry about it. And it takes us to WebAIM, where they just tell us basically access keys should typically be avoided or implemented with great care. I think that's an understatement. Other than to say it typically should be avoided. Probably should have opened those links in a separate tab. That probably would have made my life a little bit easier. All right, so let's move on to tables. In this table, this first column, and I can't, it's HTML, I can't highlight just a column. The column here where it says header 1 and header 3, those are header cells. All of the other cells are information cells. You should, whenever you are presenting data in a tabular format, have identified header cells and table cells. Now, we are not talking about trying to use tables for layout. That is a huge can of worms in and of itself, but let's leave that aside for now. What we're talking about is just the use of tables to present information. And I know some of you do this because I've seen some of your forms. So you do need to properly use table header and normal table cells for your tables where you present information. Inside the table itself, if you right-click on it, you can go to either the table properties or the cell properties. So if we go to cell properties, you can see whether the cell is a data cell or a header cell. So basically, if you're going to label something, that's a header cell. If it's going to actually contain data, that is a data cell. And it appears that for whatever reason, oh, let's go into table properties. So in the table properties, this kind of gets confusing, but this is where things can clash. So in my table properties, I have the first column, and those are my choices. I can have the first row, the first column, or both as header columns. And that's all fine. I've chosen the first column. So in actuality, the cells in this column, header 1 and header 3, they are headers, but they are defined as headers in the table properties. So here, if I go to cell and cell properties, it doesn't actually say that it's a header cell. It doesn't have to, because that's defined in the table HTML. But when I go to this table here, or this cell here, and I go to its cell properties, I do need to set this cell type as a header cell, and I need to do this at the cell level because there is no option at the table level for saying I want the first and third columns to be header columns. Doesn't work that way. Generally in HTML, I can specify the first row, the first column, or both as headers, but if I want to go into any other cells and define them as headers, I'm going to have to do that by right-clicking on the cell, selecting cell properties, and then I'm going to have to set that cell with the cell type of header. Meanwhile, all of these other cells need to have the cell type of data. Again, I'm talking specifically about presenting tabular data in a form. And we would include, sometimes I've seen that you've put like instructions and things like that, or you have like those for office use only tables where you have a couple of headers and you have some other information. That's fine, but you need to construct those. You need to construct those tables properly. Also, for tables, if we go to the table properties, you can see that there is a caption and a summary for the table cells. The caption shows up above the table. The summary contains additional information for assistive devices that describes the nature and purpose of the table and the data it displays. So in general, tables should have it. Indeed, even if we come down here, we look at this table where now I'm actually doing sort of form layout with table, and I look at my table properties, I still have the ability to put in a caption and a summary. So that caption, employee information table, actually appears right here as the caption for the table. Now, in this case, because I am doing form layout, we're going to depart from this requirement for having header data because we don't have any headers. In fact, we don't want headers for form layout for obvious reasons, although I suppose there are times when if you want to separate, by rows and you want to make one row a header row, that's perfectly legitimate. You can certainly do that. But we would not do it for the fields themselves. So notice up here, I have header 2 in one cell, and then I have the information in another cell. And we often think about, well, I need a label. And so what I'll do is I'll create a table like this, and I'll put my label right there. And then I'll put my data entry field right here. And that'll look really cool. And you're true. You're correct. It will look really cool. It's wrong, because labels need to be co-located in the same cell as their data control. Again, because of assistive devices. For the usage of somebody who does not require an assistive device, this, we'll put a label here and then an input field here. It'll look great and cool and fine. And it will also actually work fine. If I am tabbing through the form and I tab to this label, it will actually select the cell, the input field or drop down or whatever it is. It'll actually select it for data entry. It works just fine. It doesn't work fine for excessive devices, because assistive devices. What assistive devices look for is for the label to be located or co-located at the same spot as the form control that they are bound to. So, to make assistive devices work correctly, you can't use this sort of paradigm for form design. You need to put the label and the control in the same table cell. And you can do that in whatever way seems best to you. But if you are using tables for form layout, then you have to co-locate the label and the data entry control in the same location. Speaking of label controls, we've done some different things with label controls over the year. Initially, we decided to allow label controls to work largely like input controls, text boxes. They were just text boxes without the text box. And instead of, storing or adding data to them at runtime, on your label, you just specified the text there, and that text was saved as data with the label. So a label control, initially, when we first came out with it, actually saved as if it were some kind of more limited text box. That was a bad idea, and we got away from that. Not unfortunately, before some customers began using label controls as text boxes, and to a certain extent they still do. But that's not really the point of the label control. Label control is not there to store text. So we don't store it as a form field like that anymore. Because the purpose of a label is largely for accessibility purposes. Whenever you tab through a form, you're not actually tabbing from field to field. You're tabbing through the labels. And the reason why the labels are important is the labels provide the text representation that we want publicly to be associated with a specific form control. So I can call this form control employee name, and that's great. And by the way, we'll get to why I call it that in a moment. But I really do need a common sort of English label for this that is available and that is locked to it. So the way that you lock a label to a control is via the associated control ID property. Back in the before times, what we used to do is just throw some text in a cell. And if you've watched my webinars, you know that I still do that, although largely in the interests of time. And we just throw some text in a cell as the label, and then we just drop a text box in there and move on with our day. We can't do that. Accessibility rules don't allow us. Every data input control has to have a label control, and that label control must be associated with it via the associated control ID property. That is not a suggestion, that is a requirement. So whenever you're designing forms in Process Director, every form control has to have its own label control that is associated via the associated control ID property with the form control. That's just an accessibility requirement. It's required by level AA of the working group for accessibility. And so therefore it has been incorporated into Title II of the ADA. So we simply have to do it. So just keep that in mind. We have to have label controls. They have to be located in the same cell as the control itself. When we are creating tables, and this is the default in Process Director, so that's good. We want to set the width to 100%. I haven't gotten there yet, but one of the things that we really want to try to avoid doing is requiring users to scroll vertically on the page. So we don't want to set the table size to a fixed width. We don't know what the width of the viewport is that the user is using. We don't know if they're using a big desktop computer with a huge 36-inch monitor or whether they're using an iPad mini or an Android phone. We don't know. So what we want to do anytime that we are setting up any sort of I say control, any sort of HTML element that has a width specification, we default it to 100% in most cases. And defaulting it to 100% means that no matter what size of viewport people are viewing your form on, we will always fill the screen horizontally and no further. Well, ideally no further, although with arrays you can mess that up because the table can't compress past the size of the control that you have specified. So if you put a couple of huge controls in an array, it's going to stretch out horizontally. And that's generally a bad thing. We want to avoid that when we can. So whenever somebody looks at a form, we fully expect them to scroll this way. What we never want them to have to do is come down here to the bottom and scroll this way horizontally. So what we want whenever we set our tables, and all these tables are set for, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. All these tables are set for, 100%. And if I make my screen smaller, I want my tables to get smaller. And, ultimately in Process Director, here we go. I've got a problem here. I've got this array and it now is making me horizontally scroll. I think that will stop here in a second. If I go just a little smaller, what's going to happen is my tables are all going to break into single column tables. And so therefore, other than this, where the breakpoint is, so between this breakpoint and here, I've got this weird middle ground where I'm going to have to scroll horizontally. I don't think there's much that would meet that middle ground in terms of viewports unless I'm just manually doing this. Because once I get to phone size, I'm already below the threshold for what it looks like. Once I go to tablet size, I'm pretty much already past that horizontal scroll. And obviously, once I go to, full desktop size, I'm perfectly fine. I never have to worry about horizontal scrolling. So we never want to do horizontal scrolling. So we always want to have that set properly. Now, I did say when I was looking at my control and we looked at the employee name control, and it is named employee name. Now, we know that there are constraints on control names, right? We can't have more than 64 characters. We can't have any special characters other than dashes or underscores. Um, we can only have letters, numbers, dashes, and underscores, and they have to be 64 characters or less. Those are the constraints. Those constraints are placed on us because the fields that you create on a form, or I should say the controls that you place a name on a form, those control names are going to be used as field names or column names in SQL Server on the back end whenever it is creating the form fields for this table and is creating their definitions. And it's going to create a field into which to store the form data, and that field, in this case, will be called employee name. So we have that constraint. The other constraint we have is that people need to know what these fields mean. So, as a former software developer, I yield to no man in my love for odd naming conventions that make perfect sense to me. They may not make sense to anyone else, however, and that's a problem. So, I always wanted, if I put a text box on a form, the first three characters should be lowercase txt and then maybe underscore L name. So, txt underscore L name. And to me, that is a text field that is used for the last name. And that makes a lot of sense to me. In fact, makes a lot of sense probably to a lot of programmers. Might not make a lot of sense to normal people or to assistive devices who need to be able to read that control name to tell their users what it is. So we don't use any of the fancy Hungarian notation or any of the weird symbols. And by the way, in my time here, I have seen some pretty outrageous naming conventions that some people have used for their form controls. That is a universally bad idea for accessibility purposes. And by the way, we might as well say it, it's illegal. It's illegal now to use those weird names. The form field name should be a logical name that matches their purpose and that makes the intent of the form field obvious to the end user. And so weirdly formatted or weirdly conventioned names simply don't do that. So it's now a matter of federal law, or at least, no, it is a matter of federal law that you can't use those weird naming conventions anymore. Controls need to have a normal, proper name. So this is the employee name. This is the location. This is the due date. This is the department. I know what these controls are supposed to store because their names are logical and obvious. So it's the law. And even though the Department of Justice in the United States has decided that they'll give you another year before they're going to enforce compliance in 2027, unless they delay it again, because at this point they have delayed it more than once. At some point, it will be the law, and your naming conventions may be illegal. So just something to keep in mind when you're naming your form fields. And I can just imagine someone from some university looking at this and realizing that they have all of their form field names are kind of weird and strange because they had some convention that they applied, and now they're thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to go and rename every form field in every form that I've built for the last 5 years. Fortunately for you, you have another year to do that. So that's form fields and form field names. When you're using arrays, we've talked about this before, and we actually did have to go back and address an accessibility issue with arrays and the way the array column control works. You don't actually use a normal label with array controls. The reason is because an array has multiple controls, all of which have the same name. So here is, well, ARR1, R1. That means array 1. So that's array field 1. That's array field 2. And if I have 10 rows in this array, I am going to have 10 fields named R1. There'll be R11, R12, R13, and so forth. There is a question. Does this accessibility only apply for public companies so we wouldn't have to worry about it for a law firm? Okay, I am not a lawyer. Most importantly, I'm not your lawyer. What I can tell you is that the requirement for full level AA compliance is imposed on public agencies at either the municipal, county, state, or federal level. Agencies with that serve more than 50,000 citizens must be fully compliant by I believe it's April 27th, 2027. And then for public agencies that serve less than 50,000 people, they have an additional year. So they're good until April 26th-ish of 2028. If you're a private company, I honestly don't know what your legal requirements are under the ADA. I can tell you that the DOJ is going to be mandating accessibility compliance for all public agencies, ultimately, either this year or the next. If you're a private company, you're in a little bit of a hard place because I don't think that the DOJ is going to come after you because you're a private company. And Title II of the ADA is applicable, as far as I know, to all public agencies in the United States. However, what the ADA also allows is for people to sue the pants off of private companies that don't make the appropriate accessibility efforts. So the DOJ won't come after you. Yay. So now somebody's going to tritty-trot into a convenient jurisdiction, or a federal court in a convenient jurisdiction. Like there's this one county in, is it Texas, that is famous for deep pocket jury awards for civil cases. So if as a private company, if you don't comply with the ADA to create reasonable accommodation for disability, it is certainly conceivable that somebody can walk into a convenient jurisdiction and sue your pants off. So that's not legal advice. That's just, somebody can sue you. I mean, this is America. Somebody can sue anybody for anything. And because the ADA is the law, presumably you can be sued. Although in your particular case, I know that you work for a law firm. So presumably you have someone on staff who could handle that. But I would discuss that internally in your organization. So what was I talking about? Oh, yes, arrays and the array column control. So up here in the very first column of this table, And let's look at my table properties. I have headers set to none. That's my fault. Headers in this case should be set to first row. So I should have set that in this table. My mistake. So now I have a header column, and then I have my column with all of my array controls, and then I have my add row button. So because I can have 10 rows in this, and so array one might have, 10 elements to it. On the form, they're all separate form fields, but they're not really because they are all just separate text boxes that are indexed to allow you to put multiple values into that same text field. When you query an array, right, and you query column one, it's going to return a comma separated list with, 10 values in it, all separated by commas, because that is the value of the array one field. Well, this is a weird thing that the accessibility guidelines don't really cover because it's one of those super edge cases. I mean, for most of us, we do arrays fairly routinely, so it doesn't seem like an edge case. But in the big wide world of just seeing stuff on the internet, it is an edge case. So what we have is the array column control. So the array column control labels the controls in this column with the appropriate text, which in this case just happens to be column one, so it's not super specific or anything. And the association between this array column label and the array controls is all handled behind the scenes. So there's nothing special you have to do. As long as your array is in columns like this, then you're golden, because now you have each column has one field in the column, and therefore this column header here that contains the array column control can serve as the label for the entire column. And whenever the column gets, smooshed, let's make the column smooshed. So let me just add, well, I hit tab too soon. I'll add a row and, oh, I'm hitting buttons and I don't know what they are. Okay, so now I've got two rows, right? Row one and row two. So when I go over here, oops, that changes the size of the screen. I don't want to do that. Let me go up here. There we go. So now we will compress those. And when we go into a single column row, these array columns will now become individual labels for each of these fields in the array. So if I add a third row, row number 3, they're all of my array column controls that specify all of the data in my array. So use the array column controls for arrays that are in columns. Most of the time we do place arrays in columns, so this works just fine. There are some edge cases where it gets a little trickier, in which case you'll probably have to use actual label controls, which will be an uglier solution. So let's say that I have an array that the array actually takes up 2 table rows. Well, then I can't really use the array column control. Now I've got to individually label those controls, and that's gonna have the potential to look ugly whenever you start creating multiple rows of that array. And I don't really have any advice for how to implement that. So that will just have to be something that you'd have to get some direct assistance from one of our implementers with. But arrays in some ways kind of break the accessibility standards because they just don't operate like normal HTML controls. So it gets a little squishy there with what you would have to do to make that implementation work. I can't really answer the question. I can just tell you that that is something you are going to have to think about if you're going to move outside of the single column paradigm for the arrays. Colors. Colors are great. Colors tell people things if they can see the colors, but if they are colorblind, the color for not completed and the color for all documents received might not be very obvious. Color is fine as an accent. Color is not fine as the primary conveyor of information. You can use colors all you want, but those colors must be accompanied with some text representation so that there is an actual value or text that can be read by an assistive device to convey whether this is not completed, all documents received, or cannot be approved without completion of training. So, like I said, you can use color as an accent. The primary information for accessibility has to be displayed in text, not color, not images, because the other thing that people love, or at least they used to love back when I was actually developing software, and I used to have a customer who'd ask the same thing for everything. All I want is like a little circle that's either yellow, green, or red. And I don't need anything else. I just need the little circle. Okay. He wanted the little circles for everything. Great. And for him, on a desktop application, that was fine. On a web application, that is accessibility death. You cannot do it. Error identification. If I mess up somehow as I'm filling out my form, I need to be told that I've messed up, and I need to be told how I've messed up and what I can do to fix it. So I've got a little text field here that I'll just throw some text in, and I'm going to go ahead and submit my form. And at the top, oh, you know what? I keep hitting my scroll bar, and if I tip my scroll bar, it keeps navigating to the next button. And now everything is all fine. So let's do it again. Submit our form, and it won't let me submit my form. At the top and bottom of my form, I have error messages. So here is my field. Note, it now has a red border and a especially thick border on the right side. If I mouse over it, it says the error field must start with a capital letter S in order to be submitted. And I have the same error message here at the bottom and top banners that appear on my form. I think that's a pretty good error message. I've got this field. It has to start with a capital letter S or I can't submit it. Okay, well, that gives me a lot of information about what the error is in a very small amount of verbiage. So your error messages must clearly identify what the source of the error is and how to resolve it. So if I did want to resolve this, I would at least have to start with a capital letter S, and then it would allow me to submit my form. There we go. My form has been submitted, and I am now in a task on this form. I passed it. Now, in addition to the top and bottom of the form where we saw the error string and also when we moused over the field, you can actually drop in an error string anywhere that you want on the form. I mean, technically, if this was going to be a big issue, then right next to this field, under other controls, I could drop, is it under other controls? Okay, where is it? Now I don't remember where it is. Layout? Yes, it's under layout. Form error string location. So I can set error strings in custom locations on my form. So here is my form error string. Now, be careful with this. There's not much I can configure on this. It's just a name. And now that I have placed it here, this is where my form error string is going to display. So it is one of those things that is occasionally useful, but you do need to use it with caution. But you have the capability for customizing the location where you want your form error string to show. In this particular case, I probably would put it there because this is the only form field that has any validation on it. So it's the only one that really matters. So you can put the error string in multiple locations as well. So if the top and bottom aren't good enough, and for some of you, I know that they're not. You want, especially if you have longer forms, you want to have the error strings repeated here and there. That's perfectly fine, and that's what the form error string is for. So the only thing I would say that is if you're going to use the form error string and you're going to put it in a custom location, be consistent across forms. It's not really an accessibility thing as much as it is a design rule where when a user opens one of your forms, it should be familiar to them. It should be like home. They should have you should use the same user interface conventions on every form that you create so that whenever a user opens up a form, they never see anything that frightens or confuses them. Why does this form look weird? Why does it look different than all the other forms? If your user asks that question, you need to redesign that form because you should have sort of a unified look and feel for your forms across your process director installation. You want to make everything simple for your user. It's for the same reason that here at BP Logix, whenever we create multiple results here, I'm always going to put the most positive result in position 1, the meh result in position 2, and the most negative result in position number 3. My user should always know if I have a positive option, it's always going to be here. And if I have a negative option, it's always going to be next to close without saving because that's how our organization's forms work. I may have this middle button here, maybe as a result, but fine. I still understand how my forms work because I use a consistent design language across all of my forms. By the way, this is another example of how color is a great tool for giving you a cue as to whether something is good or bad. You know, for computer stuff, green is usually good, red is usually bad, and yellow always means danger, danger, danger. And that's fine, but also note that each one of these buttons, it has both an icon and literal text, yes, maybe, and no. I don't know if that actually says yes, because I can't actually read that because I have this stupid uh, icon here for annotations from Zoom. So it does say yes. I had to move that. Yes, maybe, and no. So I've got text, I've got icons that are different, a checkbox. That is good, right? X, not good. Question mark, we don't know. And then I have text, yes, maybe, no. All three of these things combine to make a very accessible set of buttons where I have both text and image and color. So everyone can tell what and position of the buttons. The position itself tells me whether I'm about to do something good or something bad or maybe something in the middle. All of these things go to tell me, the end user, what the purpose of that button is and whether I'm going to be doing something good or something bad, approving or denying. All of those things work together to make a more accessible control. Buttons should, as I mentioned earlier, unless, of course, there's a specific design constraint that you're running into, should be presented with explicit text labels. You should just make that a general rule. All of my buttons are going to have text, and I am not going to use images or icons or anything like that without text unless I absolutely have to. If you are going to use the image or icon, as we talked about earlier, please use the alt text so that an assistive device knows what that is. So all of these buttons that you can see here have explicit text. Now, my icon only button is fine. You can use it. We're pretending that I don't have a lot of space there. So, but again, I have my button with explicit text label pop up that's appearing. I've got my icon only button that's appearing whenever I put my label across it. And of course, I'm going into button properties to fill out that alt tag. In this case, I have text label, and in this case, oh, I did call it just text label for both of them. Where am I getting my icon only button? Field properties. Ah, there we go. The tooltip. I'm putting the tooltip in there for the icon only button and the tooltip for the button with explicit text label. Couldn't remember where I'd thrown them in there. Both the alt text and the tooltip text are text representations that you should have on all of your buttons. And I know you have never seen me put in the tooltip text on a button or even the alt text because I'm cowboying my way through stuff usually in one of these webinars, but that's how it's supposed to work. And you have on button properties, the alt tag to put in your text representation. And on field properties, you have the tooltip. That gets generated as part of the HTML2, and assistive devices use that for additional context for what that button control is. All right, that's accessibility. So let me go back to my form and let me just yes my way out of this. There we go. That form is closed. Now let's talk about responsiveness. For the most part, there's not a lot that you have to do to make a form responsive. There are a couple of little tricks. We are not going to get into a bunch of detail on them. And if you don't know HTML and you don't know CSS, it might not be something that you ever do. But let's take a look at this responsive form. So I'm just going to go ahead and run it from here. Actually, what I really should have done is gone back to the design view, but that's fine. So, look at this picture of my Python from Elite Dangerous. See how big it is? It takes up a lot of space. Oh, wait a second. It keeps getting bigger. My Python keeps growing. That's a really big picture. And yet, when my screen gets smaller, so does my Python. It gets really small. And then this text up here, now I implemented this badly. I would change it. Oh, look at that. It changes size as my page gets smaller. Actually, it's fine when we look at it at full screen. It continues to get smaller until I hit my breakpoint for responsiveness. That breakpoint is built into Process Director. And then I hit the second breakpoint and it gets bigger again. But notice that my picture always gets smaller. My tables all change. My text here all changes. Most of this is built into Process Director, but not all of it is. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we are going to show as tab, and we're going to move that tab into our main browser so I can click back and forth real quick. And let's go back to my form design. Let's go into the default styles and let us pull this out. And I'm going to copy this and I'm going to pop open Visual Studio Code so that we can actually read what that says. Let's get rid of that. And let me get rid of that for the moment. And we'll just paste that in here. So this is some CSS. So there is a cool little CSS property that I am using for this text right there. And that's why my text keeps growing and then popping larger and then getting smaller and then popping larger. There is a CSS property, very little used, called viewport width. And so applying viewport width to the font size enables you to assign basically a percentage of how wide the text should be compared to the size of the viewport. You can play around with this and change it. So what I've done is for an H1, I've just said, okay, the font size will be 5 VW. But when my screen hits 800 pixels, I don't know why I put this out of order, but I did. It should, for consistency's sake, look like that. So when I hit 800 pixels, I want to change the viewport width to 1, and I just kind of threw these in at random. And then when it gets down to 400 pixels, I want to change the size to 3 viewport width. So you can actually have scalable text in Process Director simply by going in and using the appropriate CSS. So by the way, if you want a sample of this form, I'm certainly happy to send it along to you. Now, on the form itself, when we get to our image, there is one property that is really important, and this is kind of universal. I've used it for an image in this case because that seemed like the most logical thing to use it for, but it is a generally available CSS property that is actually pretty cool, and it is called max-width. So if I set the max width of my picture to 100%, it doesn't matter how big the picture is. By the way, I can do this to tables. I can do this to div tags. I can do this to almost anything. Set the max width to 100%. That way, it can never extend past 100% of the horizontal space on whatever container it's in. The container may be a page, it may be a section, it may be a table cell. Whatever that container size is, in this case, it just happens to be the page width. This picture is going to take up 100% of the page width. And if I change that to 50% and I save it, note that here in the design view, it automatically resized itself to 50%. And if I go back over here into my form, it similarly is resized to 50%, and it will, oops, I changed the, I hate it when I change the size of the zoom window. If I change the size of my form, it will always have a max width of 50%. And that's as small as I can make my form, so that's as small as the image will get. So that max width property with the percentage is really good, because what that means is as the browser window changes, your image is automatically going to resize to size up that browser window. Then there's the HTML control, because in the HTML control, I can actually do some cool stuff. Now, you need to know how to use HTML to do this. So I'm not going to give you a detailed explanation of HTML and what a div tag is and whatever. I'm just giving some advice for how you can do this. But I have two responsive tables here. Now, normally, whenever you change the table, and your screen gets smaller, and I say change the table, we refactor the table so that it's a single row. And so you can actually go in and with some HTML, you can actually change that, change how that works. So I have these two tables here, and I've set one to float left and one to float right. So when I look at my form, I actually have two tables. This one floats left, and this one floats right. And what's going to happen in Process Director, if I set it up that way with those two tables side by side, is when one table, when there's not enough width left, then what's going to happen is one table is just going to float below the other. So there are some little tricks that you can play around with accessibility in Process Director. With responsiveness in Process Director. So you should just be aware that those tools are there. They are available to you. I didn't want to do too much here and get too much into the weird web development stuff, but all of these HTML things are available to you. I notice very few people use them, probably because so few people are actually, web geeks, but you have that ability. And if you do know how to use it, you might want to use it. In fact, remember last week, I found a bug in the track control where if I was passing a query string to it, it failed. But it worked fine if I didn't pass a query string to it. By the way, we're addressing that bug now. I just got a ticket from the engineer, or a question from the engineer today, asking for the project that I was using that failed because of it. So, what was I saying? I went off the path and I lost my train of thought. That's embarrassing. HTML tools. They're there. You can use them. That was the point. Oh, and the point about last week was what I did is instead of using the show report control, I stuck in an iframe control and I passed the query string to it via a URL parameter. I know how to do that, A, because I know the products, but also B, because I've been creating HTML pages since probably before most of you were aware that the web was a thing that existed. I've been in this game for a long time. So you have these HTML tools. If you know how to use them, I would suggest that you use them. There's one more thing with responsiveness, and it's, again, another thing that we are not going to cover in detail here. We have the responsive layout controls. They don't appear by default. And in fact, I have turned them off. Rats. So I'd have to go in to turn them back on so that we could see them. I'm not going to take up your time and do that. It's already 11:30. We're kind of winding down here. So let's go to dock. And go into implementation. Why did I choose system variables? Process director objects, forms, online form designer, form controls, responsive layout controls. So there is a menu of controls called the responsive layout controls. It implements Bootstrap in Process Director. Bootstrap is a web styling / design framework that you can use to build Process Director forms. You don't have to use tables. You can use the responsive layout controls. I find them kind of finicky. I don't like them. We are actually going in and making some changes to these controls. If you don't understand div tags and you don't understand Bootstrap, it's kind of hard to get your head wrapped around what they do. Also, there is a custom variable called f-include bootstrap. And this custom variable must be set to true, or you will not even see the Bootstrap controls under responsive layout. So as you can see, I have layout, but I don't have responsive layout because I do not have f-include bootstrap set to true on this system at the moment. I usually do, but I turned it off for some reason. In any event, the Bootstrap controls are actually pure HTML layout controls. There is a specific way that you have to use them. Here are all the controls. There are actually some new controls. We just added nav item to the nav bar type control. So you can do some cool stuff with Bootstrap. It is a bit of a pain to use. But because I have it turned off, I can't even demo it to you because I don't have Bootstrap enabled on my system. So normally this would be a very colorful page showing you all of the different Bootstrap things. It's not showing you that because I have not included Bootstrap on my system, for which I apologize. I probably should have checked on that, but I didn't. In any event, Bootstrap controls, or the responsive layout controls, give you an excellent way of building a form without having tables, using native Bootstrap. You have to know what you're doing ahead of time. So you have to know what your form design is going to be, because once you place a control on the page, it becomes a bit of a pain to take it out. You often have to go into the HTML source to do that right. And if you don't know HTML, that can get a little painful. But the responsive layout controls are there. They are available to you. If you're familiar with Bootstrap and you want to use the responsive layout controls, they are available to you. We are making some changes to these. We're adding some new controls. We're changing up how they work. I think over time, we're going to be putting some more work into these controls as well to make them a little easier to use and a little more friendly for sort of the non-Bootstrap experts out there. But it's an option that is available to you. Well, with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to say goodbye. Hope you have a great week. I will look forward to speaking with you again next week. Thank you for attending today. I'll talk to you later. So long.